This subcommittee frequently hears about the threats that we will face in the coming years. We know that Russia and China are modernizing and diversifying their nuclear forces. We know that these nations have a no-limits partnership and are working together more closely than we ever anticipated. And we know that our modernization efforts have slipped.
The whole idea of nuclear weapons is to never have to use them. And they will never have to be used as long as our adversaries are convinced that if they use nuclear weapons first, they will pay a terrible and unacceptable price.
As President Trump and Secretary of Defense Hegseth have stated, the United States will achieve peace through strength by rebuilding our military and reestablishing deterrence. Nuclear weapons provide a unique deterrence effect that no other element of our U.S. military power can replace, and our nation must continue to field a flexible and modern nuclear deterrent.
I have the honor of representing the men and women of Air Force Global Strike Command and to be providing you an update today on our mission, our airmen, our ongoing modernization efforts, and the challenges of sustaining our legacy weapon systems. The Air Force Global Strike Team has the privilege of executing our nation's strategic nuclear deterrence and conventional long-range strike missions. Modernization efforts include the ICBM leg, the B-21, the B-52J model, the MH-139 Grey Wolf helicopter, the Survivable Airborne Operations Center, our weapons generation facility upgrades, our long-range standoff weapons, and their nuclear command and control and communications architecture. This committee recognizes the serious nuclear threats to our nation. We face the challenge of deterring two major nuclear powers, China and Russia, who possess both modern and diverse arsenals. Additionally, North Korea poses an escalating threat, and there is the potential of a nuclear-armed Iran. This dangerous and unprecedented security environment is further complicated by the increased coordination among these U.S. rivals. This underscores the importance of fielding a flexible and modern nuclear force to effectively deter them. While Global Strike Command leads the charge in sustaining current forces and deploying future long-range strike weapon systems, we do recognize this is the bedrock of our military strength. It's the foundation of our nation's defense and essential for assuring our allies and partners. Through it all, our Stryker airmen remain our greatest strength. Their dedication, innovation, resilience make it all possible. But the world is an uncertain place. We must remain vigilant and continue to invest in our airmen and their families and provide them with the resources, training, and support they need to get the job done we're asking them to do. The Air Force nuclear enterprise is in a critical phase of transition. There is no operational margin. The Air Force nuclear enterprise is in a critical phase of transition. There is no operational margin remaining, and our resources continue to be stretched, impacting the readiness and well-being of our dedicated airmen. Today, I request your continued support as we confront these pressing challenges while upholding our nation's security.
In terms of spare parts, one of the things the committee is looking at is when we're acquiring new platforms that we also acquire the intellectual property so that we can make our own spare parts. I believe there should be a 3D printer in every depot and on every naval ship. Right now, is spare parts a bottleneck for you? Because, to be honest, 50% availability, the commercial aircraft is 98% availability. They'd be long out of business if they had a 50% availability.
The bomber fleet is challenged by what we call as legacy vendors that don't actually make the parts we need. So that's a challenge for the acquisition community to get those contracts put on order. As you know, the B-52 is 70 years plus old. The B-2's in its 30s, the B-1's in its 40s and 50s, depending on the year the aircraft was made. And we're using them a lot. So the demand signal for our bombers is at the highest level that I've seen it in my career, while we're also challenged to get the sustainment parts on the shelf for the legacy
I hope
fleet.
that could be a priority in terms of sustainment and maintenance and maintaining a higher level of availability. That's a better deal for the taxpayers, and it makes your service all the more lethal if it's available.
Without a doubt, and that's obviously the reason why we're going to be fielding the B-21 Raider platform to replace the B-1 and the B-2 is because of the age and the legacy fleet, and then modernizing the B-52H to the B-52J model. But I think the real question for the department and for the nation is, what's the right mix of long-range strike platforms versus other strike platforms? It's a reasonable question. The nation has asked several times in the last year or two. And there are ongoing efforts, I believe, both on the Hill and in the Department of Defense to assess what the correct number of long-range strike platforms are in the Department of the Air Force.
And I think part of that also goes back to what exactly will the threat be. And part of what we're asking to be developed based on the NDAA last year was a study anyway as to how we handle two different theaters at the same time, because there's a general consensus out there that if we're going to have a significant problem with one of our near-peer adversaries in one theater, very high probability that we'd have a similar threat develop in a second theater, thus putting the demand out there to be able to respond in both locations with appropriate platforms.
I've said in several public forums that this July will be the 55th anniversary of fielding the Minuteman III capability, the 91st Missile Wing in Minot, North Dakota, 55 years ago. So the time for recapitalizing the land leg of the triad, quite frankly, was probably a decade or 2 decades ago. But here we are today in 2025, and we're restructuring the Sentinel weapon system to be able to field that capability at a very stressed time in our nation's history. I agree with the committee's position that the Sentinel weapon system needs to be funded sufficiently to get that program back on track and field it as expeditiously as we can as a department. And I'm confident that our secretary will have the same position.